Hi, I'm Tim Ellis. Thank you for joining us for Laneway Live. Each night this week, we're coming to you from a different part of the Laneway Theatre, and tonight we're back in the Merlin Room. Yes, the Merlin Room where the library sits right next to the Infinity Tunnel. Tonight's special guest you may recognise. You might have seen him on Australia's Got Talent, where he predicted lottery numbers, or you might have seen him on Q&A this week, where he spoke about the coronavirus. Please welcome Dr. Vyom Sharma. Vyom, how are you?
I am alive, which is always good. Which is would have been a cheesy response a few months ago, but now it's something to be really grateful for.
It is. And are you in your office, your practice? Where are you right now?
No, this is home. You're seeing the only part of my home which is fit for display. So it's a bit of a mess here, I'm not going to lie, but this is just what I've been filming against for the last few weeks whenever I've needed to film something.
So we're not talking about filming magic at this point, but we will first of all start off with a bit, for the people who don't know you, you are a magician, have been a magician for how long?
Ooh, too long? I think well over 12 years at least. Yeah, so I was, I mean, I'm 33 now, and I would have been 17 when I started, 17 or 18, something like that. So, oh God, that's really, let's not do the maths. It's depressing. A long while now.
And did you start by being introduced to Simon Coronel?
Yeah, so Simon was one of my kind of first contact points, I suppose. It was actually first got into magic when a fellow student at university showed me some close-up magic, and I went to a couple of magic shops, went to Bernard's, and then went to the magic store in South Bank. And, you know, I met Kamal and Dean there, but then this guy, Simon, who handed me his business card, and I just didn't even know that was a thing, that magicians handed out business cards. And that was probably one of my first friends in magic, and one of my best friends in magic.
I was actually watching a clip earlier of you giving an inspiring speech to some students in South Oakley College.
Oh God, yeah. I can't remember how I got roped into doing that. What did that happen? So South Oakley Secondary College was my high school when I was, whenever that was. And one of my friends, who a lot of Melbourne magicians would know, Alex de la Rambelia, his dad went on to become a teacher at South Oakley Secondary College, and he wanted me to come and give a talk to the students, and and bust out a bit of magic, and that was that. So that was a real trip down memory lane to go back to that school.
Well, it was actually a really inspiring talk, and I will put the link down to that if anyone would like to have a look, because it gives a good background on how you got started in magic and just your journey, which is quite fascinating. But your journey has progressed very quickly. I remember you did a show at the Melbourne Magic Festival, your first solo show, 7 Stories.
Yeah, that's right. That's a very treasured memory, actually, because I think back to that time, and I was like 22 or something like that, and it was actually quite a bold experiment to even do that show. I'm so thankful that Melbourne Magic Festival was kind of there, and there's a lot of mistakes in that show, but I look back and go, some good things there too, and it was a real exercise to put on a scripted show that went on for an hour, that had a theme and this and that, and but that was probably like the first true big commitment into magic that wasn't just like spots, like 5-minute or 10-minute spots.
And was it there that you met Alex and Luke?
No, so I actually met Alex and Luke a bit before that. It's quite funny. Like Melbourne's just got such a long, deep history of magic and magicians. And this was one of the more informal meetups. So this is kind of through Simon Coronel. We'd have these sessions and we'd meet up in Melbourne Central's, which is like that shopping centre in their food court. And so I met like Luke and Alex there, or like another magic club. And we'd go to watch Magic at Dante's, and we'd seen each other perform 5, 10, 15-minute bits. And we kind of started to become friends there. And this is critical. I'm not just talking about two random friends, because eventually from there we went on to form a trio group, initially called A Modern Deception, and then later the Gentlemen of Deceit. So that was for at least 5, 7 years, my real kind of my thing in magic. My journey in magic was like the middle part was certainly Gentlemen of Deceit with Luke and Alex. And so there was, we ended up doing Melbourne Comedy Festival for several years, Adelaide Fringe Festival, and then, Australia's Got Talent. So that was like a proper 7-year journey.
And you had a big success with Australia's Got Talent too.
Yeah, I suppose we did. So we got all the way to the grand finals of Australia's Got Talent, which just couldn't have imagined that would have happened. And then subsequently led to a few gigs and TV spots and everything else. But it's quite strange. Even as we were kind of at the heights of whatever success one can claim that we had, it's bizarre to just think back and go, hey, you remember we met at Dante's that magic night, or remember where we hung out in the Melbourne Central's food court and we sessioned there? And it's a really amazing feeling to know that we all have such kind of humble beginnings, and we're just a bunch of friends, really, just doing magic to kind of impress each other and learn and get better.
And so you ended up doing shows in the Athenaeum Theatre, Sydney Opera House.
That's right.
And overseas, was it Germany's Got Talent or someone?
Yeah, I don't even know what the show was. It was something talent, do your thing, get off the stage. That was really good, actually. We did one in Italy as well. That one was not so all put together. And a couple of like international gigs I kind of struggle to remember now. But yeah, I'm just blown away by how just a very humble community of just people, kids even at that stage, who just wanted to show each other magic tricks. And when you get like-minded people who really just love what they do, and there's just a good chemistry between them, and you share a vision. And we did share a vision at that point, which was just do the best stuff we can and show it to people. And sometimes that's all you need. We ended up going like considerably far. It isn't far from blockbuster, amazing world famous success. Very far from that, but further than we thought we'd get. So Melbourne is. I can't imagine another city where that would have happened, honestly.
Well, I like the fact that your approach is very much collaborative, because most magicians like to go their own way. But you've collaborated with Luke and Alex, and you also collaborated with Simon with some shows at the Edinburgh Festival.
That's right, yeah. So Edinburgh Fringe Festival happened right at the start when we were doing Gentlemen of Deceit with Luke and Alex. So in kind of halfway through the year, I asked Simon if we wanted to do a show at Edinburgh Fringe. It was a 2-person show, and that was like, it's quite funny. I mean, it's a bit of a crude comparison, but Simon Coronel always calls it, that was our Nam. That was our Vietnam. It was brutal. We didn't really know what we were getting ourselves in for. We were one show, and there were like, I can't remember the numbers, like 3,000 other shows on this festival, like 50,000 performances. And I think we were just very young and idealistic and optimistic. Well, of course it's going to work out, and why wouldn't it work out? And what we worked out once we landed there was that the bar for what you can consider like a pass is actually very like low, because it's really hard. It's really hard. The number of average ticket sales to a show in the year we were there was somewhere between 6 to 12. Like that's what the average show would get. And we were kind of walking to expect and go, well, yeah, we're going to sell out a lot of nights and everything else. And then you get there, you realize this is just the most competitive place on the planet. And you've got some of the best acts in the world. You've got some trash there as well. But you've also just got a city that literally doubles in population for 20 odd days. and people just want to watch stuff. And so there was a certain level of kind of upskilling, I suppose, that happened for me as a performer that I don't really think has ever happened again in the kind of 20-day period, because you're just doing the same thing over and over again, but trying to make it feel fresh. And, you know, I guess one of my issues performing magic has been, it's always been something that's been kind of part-time for me, so to speak, apart from my other job. And yet I love it so much. But what that meant was that I perhaps didn't, you know, maybe improve as much, as fast as I'd liked or as quickly as I'd liked. So getting this kind of boot camp, which is what Edinburgh Fringe Festival was, it was just a kind of huge leap forward for me. So I'm very grateful I did it. But man, we are traumatized trying to sell tickets to shows. It was a struggle. We did well in the end, actually, way better than we should have. But yeah, it just goes to show, like, you're just optimistic and you're just kind of young and dumb a little bit. You know, you just take risks and just do it, and you don't really think about things too hard. And I think that's really important, especially when you're a young musician, just to try things.
And what was the secret in the end? Were there any tips you can share with other naive young Edinburgh first timers?
I think, look, it has been a long while since I've done Edinburgh Festival, but on the other hand, I know that, you know, it's like, how much harder can it get? Like, it's just, it was always impossibly hard. I think there's a few things that matter. So the number one thing that matters, especially at Edinburgh Fringe, is if you just have a good show and if you perform well. And that sounds really stupid, but when you come to somewhere like Edinburgh, audiences, it's not that they're jaded, but they're familiar. They're not going to be roped in by glitz and glamour and fancy advertising in the same way that they might somewhere else, because this is usually a highly kind of, I don't want to say educated audience, but I suppose they are in the concept of fringe festivals. People are buying, like, you know, this is probably not their first fringe festival. They're seeing 10, 15 shows and they know some stuff is good, some stuff is bad. But when they find something they like, they really want to talk about it. So that's really important. I think, you know, if you're going to flyer, which I think is really important, which is Simon just could not do it. You need to find a strategy that works for you. So for me, it was actually doing kind of walk around roving magic almost, street magic almost, where Simon couldn't bring himself to do that. But whatever it is that your strategy is, just commit to it and just do it. If you start to get into this whole thing of, I don't really want to, and maybe they're not the right person to approach, it's just over. It has to be this iterative process that you can just kind of pump, you know, volume, rather than trying to be picky about who you pitch your kind of show to. And probably the most important thing I'd actually say is to budget, is to know what your spend is and know what you can afford to lose, and, you know, and know kind of what you want out of Edinburgh. Do you just want, like, the experience? And if that's so, then you don't need to worry about a lot of things in terms of money or ticket sales or whatever. You know, do you want to make a big name for yourself? Well, then you better go with something really stellar. So that'll actually convert into success. Do you want money? In which case, do something like Edinburgh Free Fringe, which, you know, in theory, it's free and, you know, no one's paying you, but actually just kind of ask for donations at the end, and, you know, it works out quite well because you don't have to pay rent for the venue. Or, you know, or do you just want the maximum number of people to see you? And there's ways to kind of game that system too. So probably the most important thing is just to know what it is that you actually want out of the festival. And one objective is enough. You're not going to get everything at a festival like Edinburgh Fringe.
I had to laugh when you mentioned about Simon's flyering, because for those who don't know, Simon Coronel has a notorious habit of making his flyers the day before the show, and they're usually very small folded up pieces of paper about that size.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, the flyer that Simon designed for Edinburgh Fringe Festival, so the show was called Manipulators, it was actually killer. Simon's just a very practical guy, to a fault, to many faults. And one of his kind of, you know, stipulations was that, like, it has to be something that fits in people's pockets, and it's just not a chore to carry around that people aren't going to instantly discard. And look, the guy's, he's got a very specific eye for design, by which I mean that he just has a very minimalist style. Yeah. That at the time when we were doing this was very much the kind of the in thing. We had a strong image, one word title, Manipulators. There was just kind of two guys. We had this, the photo was great that YC took. And I think that actually went a long way. Like if you compare it to most other flyers, I mean, it kind of kicked ass, I'm not going to lie. And that's probably why we had a 50-seater venue, probably did 20, 15 shows or whatever. And I reckon we probably sold 30 to 40 tickets most nights, which like, that's nothing to brag about typically, but at Edinburgh Fringe, I'm shocked now. Like if I went now, I wish I could sell 30 to 40 tickets a night at Edinburgh Fringe Festival, because that's just how competitive it is. It's run like Uber. The driver doesn't make much money unless, well, very few do. But, it's the consumer who wins and the platform who wins. And that's kind of the conventional wisdom at Edinburgh Fringe, that the only people guaranteed to make money are the people who run the festival and the people doing the advertising, the PR. So you've got to be very strategic with what you want.
Now, your latest collaboration is with Lawrence Leung.
Yeah. So, do you know what's funny? Lawrence is a friend I made back at the first Melbourne Magic Festival when I did 7 Stories. So, as I said, it was kind of a very bizarre, bold experiment that I did. But Lawrence Leung, who even at the time was kind of a known person in Melbourne just because of his involvement in TV, comedy, art, everything else. And I knew of him, but he just kind of walked out of the show, another show he's watching, and he said, "Hey, I watched the show and I really liked it," which back then just meant the world to me, that someone who produced good art thought what I did was worth watching.
Really supportive.
Sorry?
He's really supportive.
Yeah, he's been one of the, maybe like the handful of extremely supportive people in Melbourne's magic history who just had this sustained, just unerasable kind of impact. You've been one of the others for sure. I'm continually surprised by how far goodwill goes in terms of just propagating like a good effect to other magicians, and how far that actually kind of comes back. It's when Lawrence needs a favor or needs anything, I don't think there's really any shortage of people who have goodwill to give back to him, just because he's always given without any expectation of getting it back.
That's right.
And I've learned a lot from Melbourne Magic that has honestly helped my character develop too. It's been a very wonderful community that we've all built and we're lucky to have. But yeah, so long story short, that's how I met Lawrence at 7 Stories, when I did that thing. And then many years later, when I kind of didn't really know what to do with magic, I wrote them this email saying, "Hey, I've got this idea for this like series thing that I want to shoot. Can I just have some brief thoughts or whatever?" And I didn't know who the guy was. He's, kind of on TV, whatever it is. And he just goes, "Oh yeah, do you want to just meet up at this thing and we'll talk about it?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't expect that." And he came and we met at this restaurant in Flinders Lane, and we just talked for hours, and he just kind of gave and ideas and support. And if you ever need any help in future, blah, blah, blah. And then nothing happened for about 5 to 6 years. 5 to 6 years, nothing happened. Until after the whole Gentleman Deceit thing happened and Australia's Got Talent and the shows afterwards and everything else. And then I wanted to start doing some solo stuff. So you mentioned that we were quite collaborative as Gentleman Deceit. But the problem is, not the problem, but there's always trade-offs. And one of the things was that I feel like I'd kind of lost exactly what it is that I wanted to do, and I wanted to develop that a bit more. But it's hard to do anything alone by yourself. So I reached out to Lawrence again, and I said, "Hey, that idea we talked about many years ago, what do you reckon?" He's up for it. And I think we had a one kind of test shoot for a trick that I wasn't happy with, and which is actually not that bad, but I think that helped Lawrence and I adjust just how high our standards are going to be. And I'm not saying that we're putting out the best stuff in the world, but for example, the episode 1 that we'd released of Strangers, that web series.
They say a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. But what is it that draws two unconnected people together? It could be a shared look, experience, or interest. But for me, sometimes I see a stranger and get a funny feeling about them. Let's find out if I'm right. Now, before we actually get started, it's important we establish for everyone that we haven't set anything up. We've just bumped into totally at random. I haven't even asked you your name yet, right? Even though I don't know anything about you, I'm going to tell you something about me that you might not believe.
Okay.
Sometimes I get a funny feeling about people. I've got a funny feeling about you, and together we're going to see if I'm right. So if you give me your left hand, I'm going to give you my wallet. We're going to put that here. And go ahead and just put your other hand on top. Perfect. In a second, I'm going to ask you to think of a friend, someone you haven't seen for a while. So hopefully someone I couldn't even stalk down on social media. And I'm going to try and guess a few things about this friend based on whatever weird feelings I get. Okay?
Okay.
So, think of that friend right now. I had a funny feeling about you before we even met. So early this morning, I wrote down one word on the back of my business card. And when you flip open my wallet and read it, I think you might freak out. This is probably completely wrong, but...
What the
Show the camera. Who is that?
That's my little sister. What the fuck? I'm shocked. He tried to guess like who it was. Then he had written the name in the morning. No way.
No. Was that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
She's my best friend.
Your best friend?
It's one of my best friends. I'm actually so shocked.
It's a guy I did a job for today, who I haven't seen for a while. Wow. And that is fair dinkum.
He could know nothing about Grace. She's not even on my Instagram, probably for 2 years.
No, I cannot believe this. This is fucked up. What the fuck did you do?
You can keep that. Hold on to that. Please do. A stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet.
I think it's pretty good. And that it looks like it's very simply shot, but the amount of thought that went into every facet of that, it's difficult to describe. And this is where Lawrence's genius as the director for this. When magic is directed well for TV and video, you won't be able to tell. It takes someone who's watched a lot of magic to be able to tell just how ingeniously everything's constructed. And Lawrence is nothing short of like a creative genius. And you kind of forget that sometimes because he's just, it's just Lawrence, and he's just humble and he's joking around and he asks for your advice, and then, sometimes he'll just have this thought, this creative urge and solve a problem in a way, just like, damn, this guy really gets it. And I think we saw some of Lawrence's best work in that episode, honestly. So I'm very proud of that. We'd filmed another one, and that we hadn't released yet because we were going to do the third one, and then this whole pandemic happened. So that's been the spanner in the works for now. But we hope to continue our work into the future.
Speaking of the pandemic, you've been the face of the general practitioners in Australia, appearing on The Drum, The Project, Q&A, all sorts of shows. Tell us why you are the guy to talk to.
I don't know. It's an interesting question. Well, why am I the guy to talk to? I think it was just the perfect intersection of a few things. There's no doubt that my experience and work in magic and just being able to communicate has been a skill that I'll carry forward for the rest of my life. And that's also complemented, however, by just the skill you develop as a GP. You're just having 20 new conversations a day, just by definition. So there's a lot you learn there. And there's an interplay there. That comes in onto stage, and what I do on stage comes into the consultation room. So there's a fair bit of that. But how I ended up being the voice for this, obviously there's a lot of people who wanted to speak out about this pandemic as early as I did. Maybe not many, but there was a small minority of doctors. So let's say that was, 10%. But of those 10%, maybe only a few percent wanted to speak about it. let's say, I don't know, go be arbitrary and say it's 5%. And of those 5%, maybe only a few percent were able to speak effectively and communicate about it. And then it comes down to just a handful of people. And out of those, who's available? So you know, I'm not exactly, you know, a magician who's drowning in bookings. So all those factors was this perfect confluence of someone who just by nothing but just morbid curiosity had just clued on to the situation just a bit earlier than a few other people, and was keen to kind of prosecute the agenda of bringing it to the attention of the government and having those policies changed, but also actually having some of the presentation and communication skills that I'd cultivated through magic. So that's how that happened.
Your social distancing video was excellent. It clarified a lot of things for a lot of people.
Hi, I'm Dr. Vyom Sharma, and we're going to talk about coronavirus and COVID-19. Specifically, I'll talk about the differences between the words isolation, quarantine, and social distancing. Now, this video is definitely not brought to you by the Australian government, whose job it is to explain these things, but here we are. And it's really important to know because the government's own modelling tells us that somewhere between 50,000 to 150,000 Australians, old and young, are going to die. Now, if you're wondering why you haven't heard this before, it's because we're governed by a pack of jackals. Now, the good news is we know the solution: social distancing, isolation, and quarantining. Now, they seem so similar that it's very easy to confuse them, so let's clarify. Social distancing is something that everyone has to do, whereas isolation and quarantining are what you have to do if you are definitely infected or could be infected. So let's begin with isolation and quarantine, words that even the government mixes up. Technically, isolation is what you're supposed to do if you have tested positive for the disease. So you actually need to get the test result to do this. And you can either be isolated in a hospital or in your own home, which is self-isolation. And what that means is that you stay home or in your own room if you live with other people, and they can bring you food, and you shouldn't really leave for anything apart from things like doctor's appointments, or maybe into your own courtyard or garden as long as you're by yourself. Quarantine is what you do if you might be infected with coronavirus, but for whatever reason, we can't or don't test you. You still need to do all the same things as isolation. Now, who's in quarantine? It's going to change, but for now, it's anyone who's been overseas in the last 2 weeks, anyone who's a close contact of someone who's been confirmed to have COVID-19, and also people potentially who have an illness that's consistent with COVID-19, which going to flu season is going to be a lot of people. Now, how long do you need to be in quarantine? That depends on why you're in quarantine in the first place, and the facts around this are going to change, but you'll need to speak to your doctor to be cleared. Social distancing is something that everyone should do. It's a multi-layered approach. The idea is to stop people clumping together and touching the same stuff. It covers everything from hand hygiene to not shaking hands, standing a couple of meters apart, minimizing the amount you go out to shops and restaurants, working from home if you can, and the closure of things like large sporting cultural events and schools potentially as well. Now, some of these things can be enforced, but a lot of the others can't, which means it's your responsibility. And it's a huge responsibility because we're talking about deaths in the hundreds of thousands. A vaccine for coronavirus is far away, so we have to use what we can now, which is isolation, quarantine, and social distancing.
But the other aspect, of course, is the fact that everything you've told me a couple of weeks ago has come to pass. So what do we need to know for the future?
Yeah, it's tough. You know, it was tough making a bunch of predictions about the future that that they're just not good news. And there was this very awful period where you're saying things that people don't really want to believe. And that sounds crazy because who could imagine the nature of lockdowns and everything that's happening globally, let alone in Australia. I will say one thing. There was something about magic that helped me there. You know, magic has got a long history of skepticism and revealing wishful thinking for what it truly is. And there's ways you learn to reveal the truth to people who say believe in everything from kind of mentalism that's disguised as real powers or whatever it is. And so that urge is always there to speak truth. I think in magic, it's the one thing I think we can all say about magic is it's incredibly truthful. because that's the whole point. It's like, you're going to watch something fake. You know, why the entire art form begins with this big disclaimer, if anything. So that was a very interesting experience of having to share truths with people who weren't perhaps ready to kind of hear them. And now I think we're in this situation where we all understand what's going on, but now we've kind of got the opposite problem, which is people are now making predictions in their own minds. This is going to be better. This is going to get worse. This is whatever it's going to be. The simple answer of what's going to happen, I'm making it a very long-winded answer, I realize, is we don't know, but we're able to, I think, quantify our uncertainty much better in Australia today than we could 3 days ago. So let me tell you what's happening. It appears that the pandemic curve is flattening. And I say appears because appearances can be deceiving. The main reason that curve is flattening is because of these lockdowns that we've done for travel overseas. And so we're getting less and less, sicknesses kind of coming into Australia. The problem is that the testing criteria we've had so far has really only been targeted towards those people. So we don't really know what's happening out in the wider Australian community. We have some other good reasons to believe that there's, that COVID-19 is not just running rampant through the country. But the good thing is, very recently, in the last 5-ish days, less maybe, we have tilted our testing criteria away from just testing overseas travels towards the community. So we'll get a clearer picture of what's happening, I would say, in 1 to 2 weeks. But I have to say, the data from the last 5 days, it's encouraging. It's showing that what we're doing is working. And, I don't want to commit to this, but it's very possible that we are not going to go down the trajectory of somewhere like in Italy or even the UK. So there's some real hope here.
A lot of people would suggest that because we've been testing the overseas travelers and the people who are likely to have the virus, that it's going to skew the figures a little bit.
And it undoubtedly has. So, for example, so we know that there's roughly 10% of cases of COVID-19 in Australia have acquired through means we cannot explain, which means there's more of it out there. So you spotted the problem exactly. The challenge is, though, you can't just test everyone. And the reason for that is, and it's not just to do with the lack of resources, it's to do with the accuracy of the test. So, if you have a test that is, let's say, like 90% accurate, but if less than like 1% of our Australian population has this disease currently, which is true, like way less than 1%. If I just start doing this 90% accurate test in just shopping centres willy-nilly, you are going to end up with an enormous amount of what we call false positive tests. Like, a lot of patients' results will come back saying they've got COVID-19, and a huge percentage of them will not have COVID-19. So you actually have to, the government's got to do like a very tough job here. They have to try and test the people where it's somewhat likely we're going to find it. It's a really tricky thing to do, but I think we're getting there. And God knows if anyone's been reading, what I've been writing on social media and doing the media, I've been the first to be pessimistic about what the government's been doing. But there's a shift in tone here that should be very reassuring from some of our experts. So we're doing okay, all things considered. It's going to get bad, but we're surprisingly doing okay for now.
Well, the other thing is that the actual lockdown itself, a lot of people would have said we should have just gone straight into a full-on lockdown to just nip it in the bud. Whereas we've seen sort of very gradual, like slowly pulling the Band-Aid off piece by piece, which is it making it worse? Is it extending the time that we're going to have the virus in Australia?
So that's actually very, it's a good thought. And what's going to happen is when we have the outcome, then we'll know what was right and wrong, which is unfortunately not really the way to analyze it. The way to think about it is, well, with the data we have available now, what should we do? So now there is a validity to what you're saying. In theory, when there's large scale kind of social distancing shutdowns, you want to do it in a perfect world for just the right amount of time. Don't start too early, don't start too late. And herein lies the problem. How do you define too early, too late? Well, we'll know by how many thousands of people die in the next 6 to 12 to 18 months. But this is the point I'm trying to make. It's like you are never going to get it just right. There is no such thing when there is imperfect information. So which way are you going to have a bias towards? So there are some things that should have been shut down much earlier than they were. And, the government's obviously copped quite a bit of criticism for that. But other things in terms of shutdowns, there probably is a good reason to have kind of weighted and evaluated evidence. So something like schools, for instance, is a really contentious one. It's actually much more complex than it seems. It's not as simple as just to be on the safe side, shut the schools down. No, you can actually end up getting the opposite effect. If kids aren't staying home and they decide to run in the park and go to the shopping centre during the daytime, because remember the shopping centres are not closed, you can end up with a situation that's far worse than shutting the schools down. It just so happens that the evidence that we are seeing evolving is that there's kind of low to moderate scale evidence that shows that it's probably better closing schools down. But it just goes to show the complexity of like a lot of things that we think are obvious are actually not. And it's going to be very easy when the outcome's done to go, well, this was wrong, that was wrong. Whereas, when I speak to the true experts in this, the infectious diseases experts like Alan Cheng, etc., like they're quite non-committal, and it's not because they're scared to make a decision. It's because they're familiar with the uncertainty, and it has a way of humbling you. Science and medicine, a lot of your intuitions get crossed by the realities of data.
So how about when we look at the situation with Taiwan, how they've turned around and basically said, this is what we're going to do, and the people have gone, okay, let's do it. They've gone to the extent of tracking people and giving up certain personal freedoms that we seem to respect very highly here. Is there a certain trade-off that just makes it work in countries like that?
100%. So when we look at the countries like South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, they've all had experience with SARS, but it's also their political structure is and the dominant kind of ideology towards authority there is a huge factor. Now, in terms of a kind of a logistical, strategic way, they acted very quickly and decisively, which is something we didn't do. And so, say something like a Singapore, they weren't really drastic with all their measures, but they were very quick to start with them. And we kind of dropped the lead there a little bit. But like you're saying, the deeper issue there is that in those countries, their political systems, there is more of a trust and faith in authorities. And the government doesn't need to second guess the public's reaction. So, for example, one of the most egregious of the delays and lockdowns we had was the weekend of the 12th of March. We had the F1 Rugby Champions Finals, NRL, there was Hillsong, and there's music festivals, and there were a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
And, we had Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, saying that, no, you can go and have fun and whatever it is. And then that weekend was over, and then Monday the lockdowns happened, and in 2 weeks he's getting angry at people in Bondi going, what happened? Why are you out there? And this was someone who was just scared of pulling the trigger when they should have, which is just locked stuff down much earlier. But there is this fear of panic that our government has, which is if we do things too early and people won't listen, people will panic and it all's kind of lost, which I think is a really bizarre fallacy because we haven't seen that kind of panic happen anywhere. Like, Italy, things are just going nuts there, and you don't see riots in the streets and runs on the banks. The run we've had in this country has been on toilet paper, and that was not an over-informed public. That was an under-informed public. Yeah. So there's a lot for us to learn there, considering what we don't have is the advantage of an authoritarian government in that kind of relationship. Well, then we better have one that's based on kind of truthful, prompt, early communication. And we've got a lot to fix up there.
And yet you don't need that authoritarianism, because the way that New Zealand handled it with Jacinda Ardern was so precise, so clear, everyone got the message and did the stuff.
I mean, the empathy and reassurance that Jacinda Ardern can broadcast wearing just like a jumper on Facebook Live, it's just outshone everything we've had in hours of press conferences, from our government. Now in the press conference, I'll be honest, I'll give them credit for the last week. they've been decent. But the point being that there is a way that you can get an entire nation of people who are all different in their views and religions and races and everything to coalesce to a common understanding that does not rely on kind of power plays. It like it might in other countries, that does not rely on this kind of almost kind of paternalistic, kind of deceptive kind of nudging of the public that we're seeing in Australia, but actually just relies on an honesty that is based on a fundamental kind of principle of compassion and deeper sense of ethics that underpins that style of leadership that I think Jacinda Ardern is showing. And it's really got nothing to do with left or right politics. Like if we look at, for example, how the Liberal government is acting now, it's indistinguishable if it's a left or right thing. If we look at the actually quite generous kind of packages, the financial stimulus packages, the delivery might be an issue of how late it's coming and who can claim it and who can't. But I think we will have to admit, no one expected this. If we were to pigeonhole them as, from being the right conservative side of politics, well, we would never expect this. And because guess what? When things get bad and your leaders start to get a bit of clarity, they see the facts for what they are. So leading by kind of compassion and with values of honesty. This doesn't need to be a left versus right, liberal versus conservative thing. Like it's just achieved by everyone.
And the final question, because I don't want to hold you up too long from getting back to all of the work you've got to do, because I cannot imagine how tired you are at this point.
I will say, like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm just, like saving babies all day. My work at the moment is part-time general practice. So I'm doing like 3 shifts of GP work. A lot of it's by telehealth from this very computer, by the way. But no, most of my work is, if it's not doing media stuff, it's informing myself to speak to the media. So most of my work is reading. I'm just reading. So right after I get off this with you, I'll be reading the modelling that was just released for Australia Today. But yeah, it's really not particularly glamorous what I'm doing.
But that's why I can ask you the question I'm going to ask you. We've had so many crazy coronavirus conspiracy theories going on now. A lot of them are coming out because of what people are hearing from their leaders. I won't mention particular countries that are sending out mixed messages that are just confusing people more than anything else. But the big question, the big thing that you could probably clarify for us, hopefully, I don't know, is how did it start?
The way we believe it started is that it's very plausible. Like, it's hard to be very precise about this because there are a bunch of theories, but everything I'm going to say now, there's very strong evidence for. It's very likely that there was a novel coronavirus, which is to say a new type of coronavirus that emerged when that bats were probably carrying for quite some time. And through some mystical twist of fate, it crossed over into humans. Now, whether that happened because someone ate it or whatever else, we don't know, but we're pretty damn confident right now that it kind of started from bats. We suspect that Wuhan was the epicenter, although there's a bit of kind of doubt about that now. But the way we know we can actually trace it down to bats is the genome. So it's actually one of the quickest things that happened very quickly after the outbreak of COVID-19 was after the initial bit of politics that happened, and China's China, and we kind of know that. Very quickly, that genome was sequenced and was shared with scientists all over the world. And we know that's true because when this genome is sequenced in other parts of the world, it links back to what we found in Wuhan. And not just that, the tiny changes that we expect to occur in the genome of this virus are all incredibly consistent. They tell us that the way that the genes are kind of drifting is you know, this seems to have all kind of just come from this one place. No one's manufacturing it in the lab. It seems incredibly just kind of organic. It's highly consistent, and we know that the virus is causing the illness. Like, that's just the other very obvious bit where we can establish that through testing. We've got a very good understanding of when you get the virus, how soon until you display symptoms, and how sick can you get, and how quickly your body can get rid of the virus. So that's very well known now. There's just 0% doubt that it is this virus that is causing the illness and nothing else.
So just yes or no answers. 5G?
No.
Chemtrails?
No.
Bill Gates?
Definitely no. In fact, no single individual is probably helping more than he is. He's thrown billions into trials for a bunch of vaccines. We have a lot to thank that man for.
Yeah, there are so many theories out there, but thank you for clarifying some of that stuff with that weird thing you've got called science.
Yeah, and science is nothing more than just thinking clearly about things. And when you make an assumption, trying to prove it wrong. And if you can't prove it wrong, it's probably true. And you keep testing and developing off that. There's nothing mystical about it.
And isn't it funny how that relates to magic too? That's exactly what we do when we're trying to solve a magical problem.
100%.
Thank you so much for your time. And it's been great chatting with you. I know I've been trying to get you on this little program for quite a while. You finally found some time for us. So thank you so much for that. We'll catch you another time soon. Bye.
You're out. Bye.